Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I guess as the case may be, on the East Coast. This is John Kogan. I'm the CEO of Performative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. First, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Business Intelligence, Raising the IQ of Your Data. CFOs often have too little and too much information at the same time. What they need is data to make a great business decision fast. Finance leaders tell us they're not getting enough or timely enough information from their enterprise systems. Simultaneously, they're drowning in data from their customers and suppliers, with even more information in the offing coming off the internet, social media, you name it. Unfortunately, the tools that support great decision-making have been lacking or inaccessible due to the cost of many of these tools and systems. And frankly, a lot of the capabilities that we want today haven't been there until recently. This webinar will offer actionable advice for finance and accounting professionals to feed key company decision makers the right diet of data to help empower better decision making. More specifically, the content will explore some of the current trends in information management and enabling technologies, how these are impacting the finance, accounting, and related organizations, and discuss some examples of what companies are doing, and identify areas you may be able to take back to your organization. A quick welcome to Performative. Actually, before we welcome you to Performative, a quick thank you to NetSuite. Their sponsorship and support allows us to do events like this and, frankly, everything we do on Performative, online or live, at no cost to our users. So thank you to NetSuite. Now, a quick word on Performative. To those who are new to Performative, we're the largest and fastest growing online resource for corporate finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. We have a very large community. We spend most of our time online helping one another out. It's nice. People ask questions. People give answers. No matter what you're doing, chances are it's been done many times before, and that's the power of this community. It's all online. It's all completely free, noise-free, no ads, no self-promotion, none of that. It's just a great place to learn and get work done. Feel free to check us out online. A couple quick notes about this event. A link to today's presentation and a video of this webinar, that is the link to the video, will be sent to all attendees within 24 hours, and the presentation itself is already posted on Performative. And you can see the address there, performative.com/resources. I believe it's a top item in the resource area right now, so you can check that out. Next up, there are many people online who will be getting CPE credits for attending today's event. We will have 3 polling questions throughout the webinar today, one sort of a third of the way in, and then 2 more 2/3 of the way in, roughly. And please take those polls, and even if you're not here for CPE credit, we'd love you to take those polls. They're very quick. They're statistical in nature. At the end of today's event, we'll share the results, so you'll get to see where you stand relative to your fellows on this call. Please ask questions during today's event. There is a question section in your GoToWebinar control panel. If you want to take a quick glance at that now, you can ask us a question at any time, and we will do our level best to get to it during the Q&A period of the event. If it happens to be a technical question like I can't hear you or where do I go to download the presentation, we'll just answer as we're going through the event. You will also be asked to take a short survey at the end of the event. We're always trying to do these better the next time, and your feedback is critical in helping us do that. Also, if you would like to be connected to either today's speaker or the sponsor of today's event, being NetSuite, then it's very easy via that post-event survey to make that request, and we will connect you via email. It's very quick, very simple. On to learning objectives. Today we're going to be talking about how you can better utilize data to make better decisions at your company. There's been an awful lot of discussion about big data, small data, access to data, online data, internal data, external data. It's enough to choke on, and today we're hoping to help you get your arms around these data issues and how you turn data into useful information and get it into the hands of people in your organization that need that to make decisions. Maybe that's you, maybe that's the folks you're working with or supporting. So we're hoping to help make sense of some of this and give you some great ideas that you can leverage at your company today. And helping us do this today, a frequent guest on Performative Events, I'd like to welcome Tom Kelly, who's Managing Director of T. Edward, Inc. As the Managing Director of T. Edward, Inc., Tom serves as a strategic partner and CFO/CIO for several unique companies. Portfolio companies include Cardia Health Systems and OnPoint Medical Diagnostics, organizations that were created by commercializing software IP from leading healthcare institutions. Triprima, Inc., who offers computing infrastructure and storage as a service delivered in the private cloud, and a multitude of other companies. His insights have been gleaned from years of working with clients, striving to build on-demand environments that leverage the cloud to ensure crisp and timely execution of a company's strategy. Tom is a CPA with an MBA in finance. And Tom, we welcome you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
You bet.
So I want to talk here about raising the IQ of your data. And as John mentioned, there's data here, there's data everywhere. Accessible, just about anything. You know, you think you would say we got digital signage. You've got your smartphones, your tablets, your PCs, your I mean, it's almost as if we're bombarded with data. You know, there's just so much of it. You know, how do you glean through, and how do you make sure you're looking at the right stuff? So, just a while back, for those of you who are remember this, the .com era. This is our friend, the sock puppet from Pets.com, if you recall. It was incredible, right? I can remember there were commercials on the radio where they had these two gentlemen talking, and the comment was, "Oh man, you know, bummer. Yeah, you know, your company turned a profit. Yeah, oh, that's horrible, man." In other words, you know, it was kind of a, as our friend Mr. Greenspan would say, a rational exuberance. But the other thing to point out is, if you recall, Warren Buffett back in 1999. 2000, the whole .com deal, he was taking a lot of heat because he was suggesting that he does not want to invest in these companies. He perhaps doesn't understand them. What he did understand is that, you know, companies are supposed to create value. They're supposed to generate money, and many of these organizations weren't, and we had valuations in the stratosphere. So hindsight being 2020, Mr. Buffett would say, "I told you so." So I use this analogy for a reason. And, you know, frankly, it's this. When we as an organization think about our data, think about running our organization, making sure people are making the right decisions off the information they're getting, really it comes down to the fundamentals of business. So let's just strip out, for this moment, all the wonderful technology that's available. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, I'm a big believer in the cloud. It's amazing the type of opportunities you have relative to the applications, those being focused on specific niches like filing and travel and expense report, to cloud-based ERPs that can put your entire processes and organizations into the cloud. But frankly, an organization needs to think about itself as to, you know, what's your vision and mission, and why have that plan? So that's a great question, Einstein. But very simply, and many of you do this, and you've done this, but you know, you start with your strategic plan, you figure out your performance management, you do your forecasting and planning, you create your budget, you do your target setting, hence, you know, what are we going to shoot for? And all of this, if you will, needs to be kind of a process, a never-ending process. It should continue. It should never be in my estimation, a beginning and end, if you will. And CFO Magazine points out that first quartile companies, they align strategy and tactics. So what do I mean by that? An organization can have the goal of we're going to grow revenues by 50%, but unless you get it down to the tactics, that being the folks who are really on the front lines for your organization, making the day in and day out decisions, dealing with the customers, the vendors, it's going to be dead in the water. So you really have to think about how you're connecting that high-level strategy down to the day-to-day accountabilities of, frankly, every individual in your organization. And when you do forecasts, they have corrective actions, proactive actions. So what I mean by that is you should probably be forecasting your business once a month. Some people have told me, given the nature of the industry they're in, maybe they should be doing it every day or every week. But suffice to say, I think a good practice is to do it once a month, get perspective on what's happening with your business, manage that portfolio, that income statement, if you will, right? We want to hit the top and the bottom line, but if any of you out there are able to be within plus or minus, 0.5% of every single line item on your P&L, let's talk. I'd like to work for you because that is a phenomenal capability. But the other thing to point out is to be able to frequently report on measures. So, and I'll get into the technologies and we can talk about that. But if you do have a plan and you've linked this plan and strategy to the tactics, et cetera, again, I think you're going to be dead in the water if you can't provide a tool or a capability for the organization to access this information, to make it easy for them to access it, to make it intuitive in terms of what they're accessing. So all combined, really what we're going to talk about here today is there's a fundamental component to this. Then there's the way to link this together, and then there's a way to have a tool that's going to allow you to deliver that message, in a digestible form, if you will, for your accounts payable department or your sales force, whatever that might be. So I talked about aligning tactics with strategies, right? So we all know, let's target the opportunities, right? How do you accurately quantify and prioritize, let's say, revenue opportunities, or anything for that matter in your organization? But then, as I had mentioned, it comes down to how do you motivate the organization, how do you motivate the people making the day-to-day decisions. So when you come up with that measurement system, if you will, or the metrics or the data, I think you want to make sure that it's going to drive the desired behavior, right? So if you have competing metrics, let's say manufacturing has to do lower the per unit cost, and that's all they're focused on, so they're going to blow the doors off of production, and you're going to have a boatload of inventory sitting in your warehouse. And if the sales force isn't connected with the manufacturing group, therein you have problems. So you have to make sure that how you motivate the organization is consistent across the different disciplines within your organization. And obviously we're all finance people, so whatever it is you're going to do, you want to make sure you justify the investment. The investment of time and effort of putting together something like this, a strategic plan down to a tactical plan, and even as far as how you're going to carry that out. What tool are you going to use, or tools are you going to make the investment in such that it gets a payback too? So I want to give you a little example of what I've done for many years. To give you an idea where this came from, what you're looking at is what I call the business alignment model. This is something I'm sure you've never thought of yourself. It's never been known to anybody in mankind. It's an incredible idea, right? No, it's not. It's very basic stuff. I had the luxury of working with what's called the balanced scorecard, and I think it's a great concept. But I worked at Pepsi for many years, and frankly, from my standpoint, how much Diet Orange Slice 6-pack cans you're selling in the state of Maine when the moon is full and the tide is high and the humidity is at 72%, I'd argue that that's a little bit too much information, and who cares, frankly. So throughout the years, what I've done is come up with this concept called a business alignment model, or BAM for short. And the idea behind this thing is to just have a structure of what you're doing as an organization. So, encompassed with this is what I've been talking about: your mission and vision, your strategy, your initiatives, and then your projects, your key tactics. It's interesting. I've always been very proud of this. I thought it was, obviously a little ego building. Hey, this is very unique. Nobody could have thought of this. And I give these comments to organizations I work with, either as a full-time employee or as part of T. Edward. Somebody made the comment once. She said, "Oh, I get it. This is kind of like a closet organizer." And I thought, okay, well, suffice to say it, that might even be more apropos. It's just like a closet organizer. So, what's the mission and vision? A little tongue-in-cheek. There's a little cartoon there, and a bunch of pirates there, and they're saying rob, pillage, and drink rum. That's pretty much our mission statement in a nutshell. So, you need to know what that is, but then I think you need to build off of that as an organization. So once you've kind of, and we know this, the mission and vision is established and you put your wording around it, your strategic objectives, if you think about those are objectives that probably are going to take you at least a 12-month time frame to accomplish them, maybe longer. But again, this is not mind-boggling stuff. I think any organization wants to grow its revenue, wants to develop world-class people, and improve efficiency. Now again, I mean, you and your own organization need to decide what's right for you. But then from there are always these broad initiatives within an organization. What are you going to do to, basically rob, pillage, and drink rum better than anybody? As a component, how are you going to grow the revenue? How are you going to make sure our people are doing the right things? We have the right people on the bus. How are we going to improve the efficiency of our business? So these might be things like, as we talked about initially, what kind of tool are you going to put in place, or tools are you going to put in place to help you run the organization, to help people make the right decisions. But then we get down to what's called the projects, and it's interesting what happens here. I'm not a big Star Trek fan, but for those of you out there who are and who aren't, there's this episode, I think it's called the Tribbles episode, where these things just keep multiplying. It's amazing. They start out with 2, and by the end of, the first 15 minutes of that episode, they have, 1,000 to 10,000. In my experience in organizations, this happens way too much. In other words, there are projects left and right, and projects could be, something a little bit more detailed, in terms of maybe it's a system implementation, or a project could be something as, simple as, we're going to close the books every month within, 5 business days. The point I want to make about this is you have to track these projects. And it's a little bit like, most organizations, the analogy I use sometimes is I feel like a mosquito in a nudist colony. There's just so much opportunity, I don't know where to start. So conceptually, really what I'm getting at with this is, use the closet organizer to organize your organization from the top to the bottom, from that overall reaching mission, vision, goal, to those, long-term objectives, to the initial focus internally within a 12-month period, all the way down to that project level, the day in and day out accountabilities that your organization is going to do and your people are going to be responsible for. So a little bit more on this, and this is it's somewhat similar to what you've seen with the balanced scorecard, but another point I'd make is, for those of you who've ever seen the movie Apollo 13, the goal of NASA, when they had the problem with the spacecraft and these 3 astronauts obviously were in very much danger about getting back to Earth, their goal, their vision mission, if you will, was basically to get those individuals back alive, and that was it. That was the focus. And there's so many interesting things in that movie. There's one scene where the engineers come together, the astronauts are, getting CO2 poisoning, and they literally dump a box of stuff which has plastic coverings, tubes, notebooks, you name it, basically everything they have up there in the spacecraft. And they say, we have to figure out how to put, in essence, the analogy is put a square peg in a round hole with nothing but this, so that they can scrub the atmosphere, get rid of the CO2, and hopefully the astronauts don't die from asphyxiation. Nobody in that room makes a comment like, oh my God, I have to do what with this? Or no, because they're focused. They know what the vision and mission and goal is. But these folks in that room also have their project. They have their focus on what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. And that is, they need to make sure they can clean the atmosphere so the astronauts don't die. So I kind of use that as an example of, we need to have a clear vision, strategies and aligned, and they need to support one another. Measurable targets, right? So a measurable target would be, they're not going to die from asphyxiation. Critical business goals need to be clear. So when you're going through this process, make sure it's being driven by your operating managers. Don't just do it from the top down. Make sure it's a collaborative process throughout the organization. You need to establish that broad framework for the performance improvement, right? So if we do come up with KPIs or data or measurements, let's make sure that it aligns with the strategy, right? But it also talks about what we need to do today and what we need to do in the future. So there's a long-term view and a short-term view for what you're trying to accomplish here. And hence the long-term objectives are combined with the short-term improvement projects, as I've noted, and tasks. A little bit more on this. We talk about goal setting. Make sure they're linked. If you look at the categories here, you have the company goal, the strategic objectives, the broad initiatives, and the departmental projects. And if we had, if I use the lines, assume those lines are continually in motion. In other words, they're constantly rotating. So the idea behind this is, yes, we may snap the chalk line and say we need to do something, but we all know that business changes. Daily, weekly, monthly, you name it. The idea behind this is you have to constantly revisit this. So as an example, let's just say you're in the healthcare business, and for some reason the government outlaws your medicine, and it's 50% of your business. Well, if your goal was to drive that product line, increase volume by 100%, that's probably not going to be a goal anymore. So you have to be nimble. You have to constantly revisit this. Hence, going back to the monthly forecast perspective I gave you, you need to think about that too relative to the targets, relative to the goals, relative to the objectives you're trying to set for your organization. And again, to just be a little bit more remedial, so this is taking that alignment model and just, drilling it down. We have a company goal, create a better quality of life is the goal. What's the measurement? Percent and dollar amount of net income versus goal. And then we have the strategic objectives. So this is just a little bit more of what the schematics look like, and here's the detail behind a broad initiative, right? So here are the broad initiatives. The first one, let's say it's increase your commercial sales. But then you have the projects and the tactics that you're going to do as an organization to make sure that you're achieving that broad initiative, and hence, if we're positive and we're tracking appropriately on that, one would argue that that strategic objective and that company goal should be positively impacted. So just a word to the group. So there's project managers out there, and it's very important to have that skill set, if you will, but in many cases, think about trying to manage an entire organization and knowing that you can't have top-level project management skill set across everywhere. One of the things that I do within organizations is I want to make sure I track these projects. I want to make sure they're collaborative. And we were talking about tools, so here's a tool for you, and it's a tool that I've used. It's very straightforward. It's a product called Smartsheets, and think about it as Microsoft Project meets Microsoft Excel. And what's good about it is it's somewhat intuitive to us finance folks. It's also somewhat intuitive to the rest of the organization, because I would argue almost everybody's had some level of experience with Excel. But the other thing that this does, it is cloud-based, so it's accessible anywhere, but it allows you to make sure that everybody's in sync. You can attach documents, you can start discussions, you name it. And there's other products out there that do this, but the point I want to make is, going back to earlier, we may have a strategy and we may have boiled it down to the key projects and tactics we're going to do. You really have to monitor those things. People need to know where they're at. People need to know where the other folks that they're counting on within that particular discipline, project, initiative, if you will, what they're doing, where they're at. Do we have any problems? So I'd argue if you can do this at the micro level and provide a tool, and this could be a tool you provide to the masses, if you will, they can kind of, solve their own problems. You've given them now the ability to have a tool that's going to allow them to be effective, that's going to be easy to use and intuitive, but at the same time you're having the perspective on tracking what's happening down, quite frankly, at that tactical level if you need to go to that level. So now, John, we have our first polling question.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pause for a moment here. We're going to launch our first 3 polling questions. Once again, if you're here for CPE credit, you do need to take all 3 of these polling questions to get credit. But even if you're not, just take a moment and answer these questions. They take 20 seconds, and we'll actually flip this around at the end of the event, and we'll take a look at how everyone voted. So you'll get to see how you and more than 100 other folks are doing things around your companies. We'll leave this up for another 20 seconds or so. Tom, it's just really interesting to see what you're talking about there, and talking about connecting the strategy all the way down to the program and project level. And just speaking as someone who's been in finance for 20 years and CFO of 4 companies, I think that is just missing so frequently. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session actually, because I bet we'll get some questions on how you make that connection and make that stick. And does it really matter? And darn it, it's so difficult to do. So some strategies around that would be great. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and I'm going to hand it back over to Tom. Tom, please continue on.
Thank you. So now let's talk about kind of what we're getting at, the improving the IQ of your data, right? And to me, it's all about driving results. And this is a little tongue-in-cheek, the old real estate analogy. But really, what are the top 3 ways you want to drive results? Well, it's all about effective measurement. If you can effectively measure what's happening within your organization, and kind of as John was alluding to, from that very top level, whatever that is, down to the very bottom level, before you're successful on a project, program, or activity, I quite frankly don't know how your organization is going to move in lockstep to make sure that we're making progress. It's not one step forward and two steps back. It is basically in lockstep, if you will, everybody knowing what they have to do, how they have to act, and really they're getting the feedback on the measurement. Because think about this, folks. All of our lives, until we basically go into the working world, we're going to school, right? Not, I'm pretty sure everybody's been in grade school, high school. Maybe not everybody's gone to college or gotten a master's degree and whatever. But frankly, you're getting feedback all the time. How I did on my quiz, how I did on my test, how I did on that written paper, what's my grade for the month or quarter. That's happening all your life. Sometimes when we get into business, then you don't get that feedback. You don't have that measurement system. So to some degree, I'd argue people are lost in terms of what they want and what they probably should be doing. People may think they're doing the right things, but if you're not giving them that feedback in some way, shape, or form, I'd argue that your organization isn't going to be performing at its optimum level, really where's where you want it to be. So this is, I want to talk about measurements and give you a little perspective on this. So you have these two gentlemen, and they are at the Museum of Natural History. And here they are in front of the T-Rex skeleton, and you have the museum guide kind of explaining into things. And he makes the comment to these gentlemen. He says, this T-Rex skeleton is 68,000,004 years old. And the one gentleman there in the middle is looking at his friend and saying, my God, that is amazing. He asks the tour guide, how do you know that T-Rex skeleton, this T-Rex skeleton is 68,000,004 years old? And the tour guide says back to him, well, when they hired me 4 years ago. So I want to keep that in your mind as we go forward here and talk about measurements. So remember this, okay? Why do you want to choose actionable measurements? This is a great cartoon from Gary Larson. I love this one. You have Einstein standing at the board trying to prove out the theory of relativity. And what he discovers is that time is actually money. And we in business, we in organizations, that is the key thing that we need to be thinking about. Time equates to money. Time meaning how much time am I spending on putting a measurement system together? How much time are individuals spending on trying to interpret what that measurement system means? Is it as easy as I got an A on my exam or I got an F on my exam, and you know pretty much why? That is at the heart of what we're talking about here today. Not the technology, okay, but the fundamentals of a business plan, the fundamentals of what you want to do to snap that chalk line so that people know what they need to be focusing on. I apologize, Professor. I understand. So let's talk about what John had mentioned before, what I said. So there's data here, there's data there, there's data everywhere, right? So there's tablets out there, Android, iOS, pick your poison. Workforce, in many cases, are distributed today, more so than ever before. You can have people in different parts of the world collaborating in real time. There's outsourcing going on. I could personally talk to that. I have organizations that we do their accounting for them. And how in God's name do I do accounting for, let's say, a company in Omaha when, part of my organization is based in Minneapolis, part of it's in Denver, and part of it's in Florida? How do you do that? Well, you do it through some of the technology that's available out there. And frankly, any device, right? So smartphone, tablet, as I mentioned before, it's incredible the capabilities that are really at our fingertips today from a business standpoint in terms of what we can do and really, being able to engage on the mobility level. Think about the self-service. In many cases, what organizations are starting to do, you've heard about that maybe from an HR standpoint, it's self-service. I, as the employee, I'm going to go out and look at my benefits. I'm going to self-serve. I don't have to call the HR person, right? But what's more interesting about this is you can take it to other levels. I mentioned before, submitting a travel and expense report. You can do that. There's plenty of applications out there, Concur, Expense Cloud, Expensify. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. But my point is, there are so many opportunities out there and tools that allow you to, put the onus on the individual, if you will, to provide self-service to them. It's their responsibility to get the information. It's their responsibility to provide the detail. And what's also interesting about that is pretty much at this point, you can do this stuff on any device, right? And then what's really interesting is the visibility from anywhere. So now, you have situations where you can have dashboards, you can have the self-service reporting analytics, you can personalize these things to specific needs. So the point I made before, taking that strategy, boiling it down to the tactical level, so you can provide that employee with the ability to, think globally but act locally, right? These are the things that, I need to, get that manufacturing process and that product completed within an hour. If I do that, I know I'm on target. I know I'm helping the organization holistically. But I'm helping it in my part of the world, if you will, that local part of the organization, my goals, my objectives. I'm doing well. Great. I know I'm doing what I need to do. I'm getting the feedback on that I'm doing what I need to do. Or in case maybe you're not, you get that feedback too, right? Allow that individual to be proactive versus reactive. So, as I talked at the very beginning, technology is great. I'm a big believer in the cloud. I've been using it in the days since it was called ASP, the early 2000s, if you will, to where it's at today, where it's pretty incredible. If you have a very specific need, I'll guarantee you can find a cloud-based application out there that's going to fulfill that need. But the thing I want to caution everybody about is there's a lot of argument, and I'm going to just speak from my perspective. So this is my experience. I've implemented probably over 50 cloud applications across, God knows, 30 companies. And I can honestly tell you, in every single case, worst case is on a cost basis, it was a break even. That doesn't bring into the fact what the efficiency gains are, all right? But the point about this is I tell folks don't waste a lot of time and effort and mind share on the ROI and TCO. If you Google that, cloud ROI, TCO calculators, there's hundreds, if not thousands of them out there now. Don't recreate the wheel. The thing I really want you to understand, though, is, yeah, it is about cost savings, but it's really about efficiency. So if you go back to the other slide that I showed where data is everywhere, it's accessible from anywhere, that's how you get the efficiency gains, right? So people now are not waiting for a report that's 3 weeks late, if you will. They can get that information they need real time, right? But it's also about data improvement, right? So not just the accessibility and accountability, but data improvement. So when we talk about improving the IQ of your data, don't fool yourselves if a product says, here's a great dashboard. If your underlying data isn't accurate, if your underlying data is not clean, it doesn't matter what dashboard you put in place, all right? It's going to be like a compass that's broken. It's not going to give you the right information. The metric may be, day sales outstanding, but if the fundamental transaction data behind that is not right or not accurate, you need to do your legwork. You need to go back to business fundamentals, and you need to get that data as accurate as possible. Once you do that, then go out and find your tool. That's great. Some other things here, I don't want to go into the detail, but at the second to last bullet, in my mind, when you leverage the cloud, you do your fundamental business 101, as we've been talking about. It is truly about effectively and efficiency running your business, right? So not worrying about, people not having the right measurement, or somebody coming in and saying we're going to grow sales by 15%, and then they walk out the door. How are we going to do that? You have to have some logic and rationale as to how you're about to do it, and then ultimately focusing on what matters most. So my comment about the mosquito in the nudist colony. You can have 1,000 projects, but if you only have 100 employees, I think we all know there's a trade-off. We need to make our bets on what we think we want to focus on this year versus next year and so on. So make sure you do the fundamentals, you do the business 101, then you can focus on what matters most, then pick your tool. So this is an actual client of mine, how they were set up. I want to talk a little bit about this. These are all the systems they had. None of them really were connected. Excel was the great mediator, if you will, trying to bring all this stuff together and report off of it. To talk about non-value added, to talk about time and effort being wasted on not what matters most. This is a schematic and an example of what it's like out there, and many of you may be experiencing this. So my advice to you is look to the cloud first. Frankly, I'd say look to the cloud, but you need to do your own homework. But at the end of the day, if you're a finance person and I said to you, do you want a situation where you need to come to an analysis with an answer, and do you want 100 variables or do you want 2 or 3? That's what it comes down to. And if you do your homework and you look at some of the offerings that the cloud has out there, you could probably knock off almost 95% of these applications you see noted here and put them into 1 or 2 applications. So you've minimized your variables now. You've got a tool that's pretty forthright. You've got your data as accurate as possible, your transaction level information as accurate as possible. Now you can come up with your measurements. Now you can report on those measurements. So you've gone from a business 101, here's what we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, to now we want to look at the measurements we're going to put in place. Now we're going to look at how we're going to deliver that information so people can take action on it. So a little bit more detail on this. So if you think about the finance process, you want to focus on integrating that management cycle, like I said. So there are ERPs out there that can do everything in terms of your processes from sales order to cash and everything in between. But then there's a planning component to it, right? So I would argue it's very important for an organization to constantly distill that information to understand whether they need to make that change in the course direction. But you can't do that unless you're continually looking at your data. You're in a continuous planning process. So, actual versus budget, that's fine, but don't do it in a vacuum. Don't stack the chalk line in December, and now it's October of the next year, and you haven't really gone through and changed anything. Because, like I said, as we all know, that income statement, that balance sheet, whatever particular financial metrics you're looking at, you got to think about it almost like a stock portfolio. So my portfolio might be up 15%, but I'll guarantee you every single stock in that portfolio isn't plus 15%. There's going to be pluses and minuses throughout. And that's the mindset. So we have to make sure we're constantly revisiting it. We're constantly making sure that the measurements are consistent where we want to go. And if they're not, we have the factual information to make that change. And if you've done this well, when you make that change, it's very easy to communicate that down and down to basically the individual who has the daily accountabilities and tactics. If you do this well, you put this together, you'd be very surprised about how quickly and how nimble your organization can be. So talking about the cloud and giving you a little bit of idea of this is a snapshot of just one strategy that we put in place. But at the center of this strategy, you do have NetSuite, and they're sponsoring this, but I just want to point out it is an ERP CRM system that all of that is on one database, one platform. There's also e-commerce if you choose to use it. So technically speaking, the transaction engine of your organization is on one database and it's working well. These things around it, take travel and expense management as an example. Think of that if you have a smartphone, you want to make it very easy for your organization, your employees to submit an expense report. So they can snap a picture with their smartphone, they can fill out the expense report, they submit that expense report. Again, this is no paper, but then think about the workflow. If you're using Excel files and you're attaching receipts, again, you may have to send the paper to somebody's desk and it'll sit there. But if you've digitized everything, you can dig into this more. IRS is fine with the digital copies and the connection to credit cards to these applications. Now you've got a data capturing mechanism, if you will, but it all feeds into that main database. And then the workflow happens within that main database. So your boss approves it, it goes to accounting, they process it, and the check is sent out, or if you have it reimbursed in an employee's paycheck. The point I want to make about this is I don't want to be hypocritical. I'm not saying that we're going to put a lot more applications on top of that. Strategically speaking, think about what I talked about before, that business alignment model. Conceptually, you need to apply that to the tools you're going to be using and the technology you're going to be using as well. So make sure you think that through. Make sure you understand that what you're doing is you're adding to the value, not adding another variable to that, if you will. So a lot of people ask me, what are the right measurements? What should we be measuring? And, we as finance folks know you can have days payable outstanding, days sales outstanding, your quick ratio, all that great stuff. But if I said to you, what does the salesperson need to worry about? Or what does the customer support person need to worry about? What I usually do with organizations when they're having a tough time figuring out what their key performance indicators should be, I have them read one or both of these books. And for those of you who haven't read it, there's some very interesting analogies in the book Freakonomics as to what drives desired behavior. So I don't want to get into the examples, but suffice to say it's very interesting and very mind-opening to see some of the correlations and analogies to certain things that are happening in the world and what the outcomes are and why they happen that way. And it's a little bit out of the box. So why I have organizations read these books is it gives you some perspective to say, maybe I need a metric that's more than just % revenue growth. Maybe there's something really in our organization, in our industry, that's somewhat unique to us that really drives revenue. A great example I'll give you of this, I worked at Pepsi for many years. And every year the risk management group would send down a premium allocation to all of the bottling operations. And it would just be an allocation of dollars. And they would just allocate it out. And there was no other measurement that they would give the bottling operations. When you drilled down on it and you really understood what drove risk loss at the operating plant level, it was very simply this. It came down to what a metric called days work lost, meaning when you had an employee who was injured and they went out on disability, if you will, if the organization didn't kind of show interest in that employee, maybe visit them in the hospital, try them to get them back to work. Maybe if it was a route driver, they can't lift cases of soda, but what they can do is maybe there's some light duty they can do, be it administrative or whatever, get them back to work, because what would happen is lawyers would go and seek them out, and the next thing you know, the organization has a lawsuit, and guess what drove the premium when you talk to the insurance company? It's the number of lawsuits on that workers' comp component. So guess what the measurement that we put in place the next year? Yes, we drove the premium down, but we also said we're gonna basically incent you on how well you do in this day's work loss metric. And the correlation, after about 24 months, premiums went down. So that's a kind of an example I will give you. Think about your measurements, right? Now, maybe I'm being hypocritical here, because the other thing is, if you remember my example of the museum tour guide who told these gentlemen that it's 68 million and 4 years old, how accurate do you really need to get? So think about the law of diminishing returns, the bell curve, right? So I'd argue, do your homework, challenge yourselves, but at the end of the day, don't overthink the situation. Really try to put in perspective what's going to drive your company and make those measurements as simple as possible and make them as actionable as possible, which is the real key here. So to some degree, the more you measure, the less you're going to get done. So there needs to be a happy medium and a happy trade-off. But I'd argue, think about your business, understand the uniqueness of it, and if there's certain metrics that maybe make sense that are going to drive a desired behavior, as we said earlier, make sure that you're focusing on them and putting them in place. And so here's another wonderful thing. When we do this, there's a T-shirt that we have, and sometimes when somebody gets going a little bit too far off the deep end, if you will, in terms of overthinking the measurement, hence going back to my comment earlier in my days at Pepsi, knowing how much Diet Orange Slice 6-pack cans you're going to sell in the state of Maine when the moon's full, the tide's high, and humidity is 72%, I would argue we're probably coming up with a measurement that is way too complicated and there's way too much information there for somebody really to make an impact on a day in and day out basis. So have a little fun with it. Encourage the right thing, but also make sure we're staying within the perspective of keeping it simple. So that is it for me. I will turn it back to John.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and let's run through the next two polling questions real quick. Then we'll take a look at the results of the polling questions so everyone can share. Tom will ask you to comment on these, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So speaking of Q&A, just as a reminder, if you have any questions for Tom, then please go ahead and get them in when you're done with this poll. And we're going to get into the questions in just a few moments. I'm going to give about another 15 seconds for this polling question, and we'll get on to the next one. And Tom, I'm never going to forget 68 million and 4. That's a good one. Okay, another few seconds, folks, and then we're going to go ahead and pop on the last of our 3 polling questions. So I've just pulled the second one down, putting the third one up right now. Once again, required for everyone for CPE credit. For everyone else, please take it. Interesting statistical data. Give us something to talk about in just a moment. You'll be able to see how your peers, what they're doing, and kind of where they and their companies are with regard to these issues. Also, a quick reminder when we're done with this webinar, which will be in about 15 minutes, when we close the webinar down or when you step off the webinar, you'll be presented with a brief survey. It takes about 60 seconds. We greatly appreciate your taking that 60 seconds. It'll help us do better the next time. Also, if you want to connect with Tom or if you would like us to connect you with NetSuite, the sponsor of today's event, it's just a click of a mouse away, and we'll make that introduction for you. All right, get your votes in. I'm going to go ahead and close this down now. Click, and let's go ahead and take a look at these first, Tom, before we hop into the Q&A. So I'm going to go and start with the first question. How does your company manage data for analytics? And dumped straight from the ERP system into Excel. We probably could have said any system into Excel. They're 54%. That's actually a little lower than I would have expected. But Tom, what's your recent experience tell you?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit lower than I would have expected. But frankly speaking, maybe several folks, because in the performative community, are taking some examples of this. The biggest thing for me on this, when you get into mostly within your ERP and accounting system, what that tells me is you're taking the time and effort to make sure that it's coming out of the normal processes of the organization. So you and the finance group then don't have to take that information and spin it and cut it and reanalyze it before you send it out to the masses to make decisions on. Makes the organization much more efficient. But yeah, I mean it's a good indicator, I'd say, in terms of where we're going. But I thought it would be a little bit higher as well.
Yeah, actually, I'm kind of surprised to see the ERP/accounting system be as high as it is. I think back in the day, I remember back at Cisco, we were on one of the mega systems, and it would take months to crank out a report. Perhaps with some of the new cloud platforms out there, it's easier for users to tickle the ivories themselves and write their own reports, Tom?
I would absolutely agree with that, and that's frankly, what I'm able to do with some of these cloud applications is put that in place so that when we come up with a dashboard, people understand what they're looking at, and it makes sense. It's somewhat intuitive versus here's my Excel file with all my gyrations and changes to it, and then when they go into the ERP system, the number's different, and you then start the wonderful, dive of the arguing whose information is right or wrong. So,
right. And do you find that when you're when you're helping a company implement a cloud-based ERP, no matter whose it is, that a majority of the time and attention in order to get the ROI is on helping users understand how to extract data, create their own custom reports, create their dashboards, et cetera?
Well, yes and no. What I try to have organizations focus on is not so much creating their custom reports at first. I have them focus on, number one, make sure the data's in the format we want it, and then make sure what type of things that we want to report on are well understood by each individual and the role they play within the organization. So what I try to do is not have them go right to extracting data, if you will. I rather have them just go and have the system provide them the feedback on what the particular measurement is that they may care about. Now, some of these systems do a great job of maybe the metrics right, but they want a little bit more detail. It's amazing about how easy it is to drill down and even going, let's say, all the way down to an invoice level, what's driving certain information within that metric. So to some degree, I try to have them leverage what the system will do for them as opposed to them having to create custom reports or things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Let's go ahead and take a peek at the second poll result. That's coming up. How well does your company leverage data for analytics? Good at Excel, but mostly for ad hoc analysis, but getting there, and systems use enable higher level analysis. That's actually, once again, higher than I would have expected, but maybe this is the result of having all those easily accessible cloud-based tools. Tom, what do you think?
Well, yeah, but when I'm looking at the very well advanced analytics, highly automated 3%.
Right.
To me, I look at that number and say we're not leveraging, let's say the fundamentals, if you will, and then the tools that can help us get there. The two in the middle there, we're good at Excel and you're getting there. Again, in both of those cases, add them together because they both talk about higher level analysis is enabled in ad hoc analysis, which means there's still more legwork that you're doing. You've closed the books, you've generated the metrics, and now there's still more work to do because you have to do some ad hoc analysis or some higher level analysis to help people interpret what the information is saying. So to me, that's
I'm being too easy on people.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go ahead and hop into the third one, and then we'll get into people's questions. And by all means, keep the questions coming here. Okay, the final question was, how important is it for your company to do data and analytics better in the next year? So we're talking the next 12 months here. And it looks like it's important to critical. So this is timely, and certainly we're self-selecting a little bit, given the fact that folks are here today. But Tom, you're helping companies with all sorts of issues around the corporation, from implementing new ERP systems and expense management, et cetera. When you look around at your client base and when you look around beyond that, how important is data and analytics these days in the general scheme of things for finance and related organizations?
Again, important, very important, critical. I frankly, sometimes, particularly in this day and age, when an organization is doing well, and many of us have experienced this, people don't necessarily scrutinize the details, right? So our revenues are up 20%, our net income's up, 10, 15%. Everything's going great, so we don't really worry about the nitty-gritty in terms of what's happening, one particular, analytic or line item to the next. It's when things start to go into a downturn or the organization isn't performing as well as they thought it would on the top level is where you need to start descending down from that 10,000-foot level. And here again, this is where I get back to talking about the efficiency and focusing on what matters most. If you're focusing on gyrating analysis and special details and all that other stuff, I don't know if the organization is in a timely way focusing on what matters most. And I would absolutely argue that the finance group is not really being as value-added as they can be in terms of helping drive the businesses. All they're doing is, being model jockeys and moving spreadsheets around.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and move to questions at this point. First question, Tom, you spent a lot of time up front talking about aligning strategy with the actual activities that the company is undertaking, and then getting that out to the company and tracking it, et cetera. I don't see a lot of companies doing that to that degree. I see some bottom-up. I see a lot of top-down. There seems to be a lot of disconnects in between. How do you effectively make that connection and continue to drive the focus of the operations based on the goals that you built earlier in the year? And is that what a finance organization is supposed to be spending some of its time doing?
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I think it needs to be a collaborative effort, so across the functions. I'm biased here, but I think finance needs to lead it, only because they're looking at that entire portfolio of the organization. But when you do think about this, if you go back to the alignment model, and again, that's my tool that I use. Balanced scorecard's fine. There may be other things, but the point I want to make is you need to have a goal as an organization, and you need to have a measurement associated with that. And like I said, you can boil the ocean and try to figure something out, or at the end of the day, as we all say, cash is king, so maybe your cash flow needs to be, X millions of dollars at the end of the year. Well, if you think about that, then start to figure out from there, what are the things that we're going to do to make sure that we're going to, achieve that number, maximize that metric, whatever it might be, and, start with the top but drill down to the bottom. And like you say, some people say it's bottoms up, tops down. I think it needs to be kind of both, right? You need to kind of have a vision and a strategy for what you want to do, but as we were just talking about earlier, doing your detailed ad hoc analysis, you need to think through what are going to be the right things to focus on. And then if I talk about the measurements and you want to desire those, drive the desired behaviors of the organization holistically, you need to be able to drill them down and ferret all the way down to the bottom so that, the individual may have, 3 or 4 key things and metrics that they're focusing on daily, weekly, monthly, if you will, to ensure that that's driving, all the way up to the top of maximizing cash flow. It's not so much, John, that it's, I know what I'm talking about. People are probably, yeah, I get it. But, it really is about putting it in practice. It's kind of walking the talk. You really do need to do it. And it's not, conceptually, it's not that hard. It's when you get into your business and what's really driving your business, that's where it can get to be a little challenging, making sure you're, understanding the levers you want to pull as an organization.
And Tom, have you seen tools? I mean, you showed Smartsheets, which look like a sort of project management slash, some level project visibility tool. Then on the higher end, or maybe on the more abstracted end, I shouldn't say higher end, you have dashboards, which show, major elements of the company, deals closed, revenue booked, whatever. Have you seen systems that actually help connect those two so that the folks who are driving the company, leading the company can actually see all the way down through, what's driving the marketing organization these days? So anything that helps connect those dots, as you suggest?
Yes. Let me just talk about NetSuite for a second. So NetSuite's an ERP, and they also have modules called, I think, basic projects and advanced projects, and there's a group called Open Air, which is very specific to, consulting law firms, real project-oriented companies. Here's my experience. Again, this is a statistical sample of one. I think some of those things are all well and good, but let's just think about, do I want to get a license for every single individual in the company? And then if I do get that license, sometimes the training could be a little bit arduous to really have everybody understand things intuitively. So when you think about projects, these, as I talked about the business changing all the time, my gosh, projects can change minute by minute the way organizations have things happen. What I'm arguing there is, and my gosh, you can even do it in a spreadsheet, but what I'm arguing is you kind of need to micromanage those projects, if you will, and have some perspective on it. So you can always go to that, application. Again, I use Smartsheets. It's a great way to get a complete perspective on projects in general. And from there, you can put that information into a system so that at a high level, you're going to get a perspective on, are we completing projects on time? Are we having issues? That type of thing. So you at least get that piece. But then as you go into the transactions of an organization, that's where I think you want to centralize it and have it in that, that one tool. So, again, it's my preference. It's worked well, I'll tell you. It doesn't mean that at some point like I said, with a cloud application, somebody might build a better mousetrap or already have one built. I just don't know about it. But that's technically, that's my perspective on how I would recommend you, crawl, walk, run, if you will.
Okay, we've got time for one more question here, of course, we've got a number of them still to go. But why, in your estimation, why do ERP systems not have better analytics built in? There are an awful lot of, God knows there's hundreds of ERP/accounting systems out there, but there are also hundreds of BI and analytics platforms out there. Why is that? Are there people building, ERP systems these days where they deliver better analytics? Where do you see that headed right now?
And so that's a great question, and here's my response to that. This is where it comes back to what's happening with your data. So we talk about improving the IQ of your data. How clean and how accurate is the data that you have in that system, right? The ERP system, if you will. And, a couple of them have some great dashboards. But if you don't put things in the right buckets, say the right department, the right division, the right month, the right line item, when you pull up a dashboard, and there's a lot of great dashboards that have this canned information, right? Like I said, you may have AP or date table outstanding information. That's an automatic calculation, and some of it is configurable. If you don't start at that lowest common denominator, which is when you enter that invoice, right, or you enter that bill for payment, if you don't do that accurately, consistently, then I don't care what type of business intelligence tool you buy, it's not going to be right, and it's going to be a disaster, frankly, because you're going to be spending all this money, and yet really what it comes down to is, in essence, that lowest level data and how you're capturing it within whatever the system might be. And to point that out, some of the systems have good dashboarding, some of them don't. You can, there's other offerings out there, Google it, if you will. But that I can't stress that enough. I think I have quite a bit in this call. But that's really what it comes down to, folks. It's not, there's no eye-opening thing here. It's that simple. Okay. And it's simple in concept. It's not necessarily simple in practice, as I think we all experience in our daily jobs.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. Thank you very much for joining us today for the time and insights and the slides, which are already posted on Performative for folks who want to pull them down, and we will follow up with an email. So, Tom, greatly appreciate your time and attention today. Thanks for joining us again to help us move our understanding of how we can do things better forward.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
You bet. Quick note here, once I turn off the webinar, which will be in about 40 seconds, you'll get a short survey. Please give us 60 seconds on that. If you want to be connected with Tom or with NetSuite, please make note of it there. And we will help you do that. It's very simple. If you have any questions about CPE credit, you can see Tanya Walsh's email address. She runs our CPE program at Performative. She's extremely helpful and quick to respond, so just drop her a line if you have any questions. Finally, thanks to NetSuite. Through their support, we are able to do events like this and, frankly, offer the entire Performative website and everything we do at no cost and with no advertising to our users. So thanks so much to NetSuite for their support. We hope to see everyone again on another Performative event or online at performative.com. And with that, I will let you all go and bid you a fantastic rest of your week. Hope to see you again soon, folks. Take care.